Okay, so here we are, sentences level 4. So we are moving through the different levels of sentence formulas that are central to our learning and composition skills for our English class. And we're moving into this level, which looks at that clauses, which clauses, and removable clauses. So essentially, these are our three next sentence structures that we want to learn about and become comfortable using. Now, all of the structures that we'll learn on level 4 are a little bit different because we're looking at how to add additional information into one of our core clauses, and these structures allow us to do that. So all of them are for adding extra information, defining information, details essentially. And these are three different ways to include extra details. So first we'll take a look at that clauses, and that clauses, just as I've stated on the kind of opening slide there, are a way to add extra information. Now this particular type of structure is a restrictive clause and is actually called a restrictive relative clause. So let's learn about the parameters. So that clauses, we can add them into any of our existing structures, any of our existing sentence structures. And they are always going to be part of a complete clause. So that means the clause that you are building and adding them into, or that they are part of, also needs to have a subject noun and a main verb. There you go, very straight shooter stuff here. They're going to add extra information, they're going to define, they're going to explain, they're going to create detail, and they're powerful and very commonly used way to add the information into existing sentences. Again, so they're going to define the clause that they come after. So let's take a look at our formula. Oh, last point, and this is crucial. I shouldn't get ahead of myself. With that clauses, you do not need a comma to connect them into the idea that they are building on. So we're going to use our standard setup for a formula. So we start with clause 1. We know that clause 1 needs to have a subject noun and a main verb. Then we're going to add our that clause. It just gets tacked on to the end. And note here in brackets, we've kind of doubled down on this main point. We don't need to be adding a comma, and our new structure can be added into any of our existing formulas. So a powerful way to learn is to look at some examples. So we enjoyed the play that was held in the Port Theatre, period. So you can see we've got our first clause, clause 1, we enjoyed the play. So it's got a subject noun, right, which is a pronoun actually, we. We've got our main verb, enjoyed. Then we've got an object noun, the play. We could stop the sentence right there. It's perfectly fine. It's grammatically correct. However, for whatever reason, the writer wants to add in some details about the location. So one way we can do this is by tacking on a that clause. That was held in the Port Theatre. So interestingly here, that is starting a brand new supplemental clause. And the word that is the linking word, but it's also holding the position of a subject marker in this new idea. So that was held in the Port Theatre. That was held. There's our subject and our verb. And in the Port Theatre is a prepositional phrase that describes location. Second example. So you see there are two different versions here. The first one, we've kind of got the fully developed sentence, and then the that clause is adding detail information about the location. So here, let's talk about our second example. We believed that the cat would return, period. So it's slightly different, but this structure is very, very common in English. So you'll notice we have the pronoun again, we. We've got our main verb, believed. And then we've got our clause, our additional information, our restrictive relative clause. And the reason we call it restrictive is because once we've tacked it on there, it becomes essential. And you can't really easily remove it from the structure. So the main point there is there's no comma, right? So we've kind of just really fused it onto the existing idea, right? And you'll notice very common, we'll see a noun and then a verb, and then we have our that clause. That the cat would return. But notice structurally it's a little bit different than example number 1, right? So we have that, that's our relative clause linking word. And then we've got the cat, that's our new subject that's in the new idea. Would return, that's our verb. Both of these structures are powerful. Both of them add extra information. I'll encourage you when you're writing your examples. We know we usually do demo, like I do my information push, then I do a demonstration piece. And then I'll encourage you to practice your free practice. So I encourage you in your free practice round, try to do both examples here. Okay, so the cousin of the that clauses are the which clauses. And we're not talking witches that are out in the forest, toiling away and making a potion in a big cauldron. We're talking about witches in which clauses in terms of another way of adding extra information. And these are also relative clauses, but they're non-restrictive relative clauses. And we'll see that although they're structurally different, are structurally very similar to our first example, the that clauses, there is one significant difference. So again, they're another way to add details. This is the big difference right here. So which clauses, they will always be marked, they'll be headed by a comma. That clauses, no comma. Which clauses, always need a comma. So the information that they add is non-essential information to the sentence's core idea or core meaning. And so you can see, here's our formula. You've got clause 1. So again, that clause will need to have a subject, noun, and a main verb. And it might have an object as well. There might be a prepositional phrase there, although those are optional, depending on the way the initial clause is written. And then we're going to have comma, and we're going to have a which clause. And again, these can be added, as you'll see when I do demonstration sentences a little bit later, they can be added to all of our existing formulas. Example, we like the car, comma, which was driving down 5th Street. So in this case, it's non-essential, it's non-restrictive, and therefore we've chosen the which clause, and we've used a comma to link it into the initial idea. Number 2, Old Mossy ransacked the camp, comma, which was built over the old Salmon Creek. So you can see I'm connecting in some of our ideas from our short story unit. And indeed, yes, everything here is perfect. Old Mossy's our noun. Ransacked is the verb in the past tense. The camp is the object. Now, for this particular sentence, the author, the writer, has decided, I want to include some additional information about the camp. So we add a non-restrictive relative clause, a which clause, which comma, which was built over the old Salmon Creek. Gives us additional information. And the main difference here between the restrictive and non-restrictive, sometimes students will ask, well, how do I know which one to use? Well, that's up to you as the writer. And the main point here is that if you want to try to convey that the information is essential, then you should use a that clause. If you're trying to say, yeah, it's extra information, but it's not that important, that's when you should elect to use a which clause. Okay, lastly, so we're going to talk about removable phrases. Now, in fact, they can be words, single words, phrases, or even full ideas, but this is another way for us to add extra ideas or extra details into our existing formulas. They're the last way to add information. Again, they've got kind of a few different primary tools, primary methodologies that they're giving us power to do as writers. So they allow writers to define, to explain, or to elaborate. They're also non-essential. Thus, notice I'm using my academic sentence structure there. I've got all 3 parts of the academic link, semicolon, thus, comma. They can be removed without damaging the core idea. So these are extras, and we're kind of parachuting them into the clause. And the way we do that is we surround them with commas. We kind of wedge them in there. But that means we can also easily just pop them right out as well. So number 1, first example, the wrestler, comma, the huge man with black hair, comma, hung his head in shame. So you see what I mean? Like the phrase that we've put in the middle here, the huge man with black hair, it's giving us details. It's describing the wrestler, but it's not essential to the core idea of the sentence. We could pop that out of there. It's got those 2 commas in on either side. We could just airlift all that out, and we could just have the original sentence, right? The wrestler hung his head in shame. Perfect, grammatically correct. We've added our removable phrase to define the wrestler, to elaborate about the wrestler, give a physical description. Second example, and you'll notice in terms of placement, one of the places that work very well for a removable is after the subject noun and before the main verb. And in that case, that removable phrase or word that you're adding in, it will be describing the subject noun. It'll be giving us more detail about the subject noun. Second version or second placement is using our compound sentence structure, as you'll notice. We wandered into the forest, comma, but, comma, turned around, comma, we could not find the path. And so that's another placement that is very common. So keep both of these two placements in mind, and we'll encourage you to practice them and become comfortable with them.